This interview with Edna Anderson is being recorded on Wednesday, September the 23rd, 1998, at her home on Ewan Avenue, New Westminster. The time is 1 p.m. The interviewer is Dick Ramsey. Edna Anderson was born in the Sopperton community of New Westminster. Her birth in 1918 took place in the Royal Columbian Hospital. Edna's parents, Albert and Annabella Moore, née Annabella Chaplin, were from Owen Sound, Ontario, and Dundee, Scotland, respectively. Edna was the only child. The family moved to the Queensborough community in 1921. The house in which Edna presently lives is the one her father built shortly after arriving in Queensborough. Edna has a number of varied activities and interests. In addition, she received the 1997 Citizen of the Year Award in 1998. Also, she was a recipient of a Garden Award, specifically known to the locals as the best conversion of the septic tank area. Edna, thank you for giving me the opportunity to interview you. Perhaps we could start the interview by taking a short trip down memory lane, as they say. Let's start with your school years in Queensborough. Could you share with me, Edna, your experiences on the school playground as well as the classroom, and including special events that seem to you to be very impressive? Let me say, possibly impressed you the most.
Well, my early school years were not entirely happy years because the first day of school didn't impress me very much at all. Mother took me down to register me on the day that the school started. We had no preschool, no kindergarten, and it was, you were taken to the school, you were registered, and you were left there, and that's how your school began. I was a shy child and had been with my mother constantly, not mixed too much with other people, and so this was a very traumatic experience. As time went on, I became accustomed to school life. The things I liked best were of the artistic kind. I loved drawing and painting and that sort of thing. And I liked my teacher in the beginning grades. In grades 3 and 4, we had a very strict teacher who we were all afraid of, and we later found in life that she had laid a very good foundation for us, and we became much more appreciative of her at that time.
Well, you mentioned various creative arts in which you showed an interest. And of course, later on in life, you became involved in writing poetry. We won't talk about that right now, per se, but did you write any poetry in those days?
No, I'm afraid not.
Did they ask you to write short stories of
not till later grades.
Yeah.
But I did enjoy that, and my mother had been a writer of sorts, and I think perhaps that came from Mom's side of the family.
Would you have any idea, Edna, when the school you attended was built?
Yes, that school building was built in 1911 and 1912 for the opening of that school year. And I distinctly remembered in grades 3 and 4 that we had a pot-bellied stove in the room. And later in life I was quite enamored of this, because to have gone to a 2-room school with a pot-bellied stove was somewhat of a historical situation.
Yeah.
And in the rooms of first and second grades, I didn't remember a stove, and I thought of that later and wondered why there was no stove in that room. In talking with an old friend, she told me that there was a furnace in the school, and it worked very well for all the school, the hall and the other rooms, except the room for grades 3 and 4. and this necessitated having a pot-bellied heater in the room, which the big boys had to keep supplied with fuel.
It's amazing, all right. How far was the school from your home, would you say?
Oh, about 3 blocks.
3 blocks. It was on Ewing Avenue?
Yes.
Oh, I see. What kinds of special events would you say they had? For example, Queensborough, the neighborhood of Queensborough, is an integral part of the city of New Westminster. Right. Now, you were involved in May Day, were you, as a school function?
No.
You weren't?
No.
Oh.
Our school was not considered large enough to participate in the May Day.
Oh.
And there was something of a stigma always connected to Queensborough as being that part of the city which was the poorer section. And so it wasn't until 1931 that we had participation in the May Day, and we had the May Queen that year, and it was just a remarkable event and gave our kids a great boost.
Was that May Day held here at Queensborough, or was it?
No.
That was the best. Yeah.
It was the New Westminster May Day. Yes.
Right. You took part in the regular May Day program. And one of the reasons for not providing with the opportunity to participate earlier, as I understand what you're saying, Edna, is because the school was too small and the people were poor. Was that a criteria?
Well, more or less, we were a working class community. We had a lot of immigrants come into this area, and because the immigrants were from perhaps Europe or India or so on, their English wasn't good, and so we were not considered really a part of the better class of New Westminster.
Well, on the surface, I'm afraid to say that I'd react to that as just rank discrimination, you know. I think a citywide program such as May Day would serve the people in this community better, I wouldn't say better, but just as well as anybody else, because it would give them an opportunity to feel integrated into the community. But apparently that wasn't their goal. Well, anyway, we won't argue that.
Well, I would like to tell you one thing, Dick.
Yeah.
Our concept of people working together and so on is far different today than it was at that time in history.
Oh, I realize there's less discrimination, although there's a lot of subdued discrimination, subtle discrimination, and bigotry. But I'm really sorry to hear that. I thought New Westminster would be concerned about providing equal opportunities for all their citizens. Right? However, I guess that's anyway.
Well, today they look at it that way.
Well, I'm glad to hear
and
that.
It's very
I'm
nice.
very glad to hear that.
Yeah.
All right. Now, I would imagine, so as far as other special events are concerned, you would have your Christmas concerts, would you?
Yes, that was one thing I particularly enjoyed at school.
Yeah, I would imagine so.
And we gave our teachers credit for teaching us things that perhaps wouldn't be common to all the people who lived here because of our different ethnic backgrounds.
Yes.
They had different ways of celebrating. And Christmas is basically, to English people, a Christian celebration. So with other backgrounds, you don't have that same connotation.
No.
But it was wonderful to be in the school play, and I
Sure.
happened to be one of the chief characters in one play. And, and
Did you say one of the chief characters? Oh, I'm just joking. Go ahead.
Well, I wasn't the big cheese of Charlie, but I was quite evident in the first part of the play, and then I was supposed to fall asleep, and all the action took place around me.
I see. And did you actually fall asleep?
I'm afraid not. No.
How about a picnic, an annual school picnic?
No, we didn't have such things.
You didn't have that.
We had a big do. Big do meaning that we had a special time on the last day of school when we had our report cards given out and all the accolades for the good students, and teacher would give us some treat of some kind which she would pay for out of her own pocket. And we were so glad to get out of school that in itself was a great celebration.
Yeah. There's one question I didn't ask you, and I guess I should have asked you. What was the name of your school? The Queensboro Elementary School?
Queensboro School.
Queensboro School. I see. The Queensboro School, as you knew it, no longer exists. Is that correct?
It was replaced by a more modern building in the 30s, I believe.
In the 30s?
Yes.
But is it still in the same location?
It was at that time.
Oh.
But there was a fire, and the school burned down. It was about 1985,
in the 80s,
somewhere like that.
Yeah, sure. Oh, I see. And so it's not on the same location. Now, the new school's in some other avenue, is it?
Yes, it's on Salder Street.
Salder Street. That would be just across from Annis's Island?
Well, it's at the back of the community center.
I see. Oh, back in.
I would like to tell you a little story, though, about today that the school burned.
Oh, yes, that would be interesting.
During the night, actually, that it happened. And it seems our family slept through all these momentous occasions, and we did that night as well. And the next morning, I was phoned by my little neighbor, who said, "Did you know our school burned last night?" I was shocked to hear that. And the accounts we got from the children and from those who had gathered around for the opening of the school day, the next day after the fire, the children were actually standing there crying because their school had been burned.
Boy. Yeah.
And so it shows you what an attachment the children had for their school.
Sure.
And the teachers were remarkable in that they had this ambience with the children, because to have the children mourn their school, I think, is quite a good thing in their favor.
Well, apart from your school activities here in Queensboro, I imagine there are many places to explore, or things to do with your parents or with your friends and so on.
Well, in the early days, the community was, the people who were living here were few and far between. And right on our own corner, we had a few houses. The woman across from us had a dairy farm. She had 9 beautiful Jersey cows, and I used to go over and visit her, watch her milk the cows, and she had usually calves running around in the lot next to her house, and I'd go in there and try and play with the calves. Our activities were centered more in our own home. Mother and Dad were ardent gardeners, and my life was associated with gardening because of their feeling for the garden. We did go down to the river quite a lot, just for a walk or to, go just to enjoy the outdoors and so on. During the Depression years, my dad went down there to get driftwood logs and so on, which he sawed up into firewood. And the days that he would go down to saw up the wood, Mother would have packed a picnic basket, and I would have wandered around amongst the mud and the flowers and so on. But that was an outing for us.
Of course. And fresh air, too.
Yes, it was lovely down there.
Right.
It seemed as if you were miles from everywhere because it was so quiet. It was beautiful.
Well, that's very interesting, Edna. After you left by the way, the new school, does it have is it called the Queen Elizabeth School now?
Yes.
Yes, I understood that. That slipped my mind. So it was the Queensboro School, and then it moved, the name was changed to the Queen Elizabeth School. Well, we got that. So then after that, you moved on to school across the river, and I know you've told 1 or 2 stories in the past about bridge crossing incidents. Do you think you'd be able to share 1 or 2 of those, at least one anyway, with us?
Oh, yes, there were always incidents about Queensboro Bridge.
Yeah.
And as much as we needed the bridge, we despised it. It was terrible inconvenience.
Yeah.
When the bridge was out of order, our lives were out of order because we had to have some other means of crossing.
Yeah.
At one point, I remember the bridge was knocked out of line by a boat running into some of the supports, which meant that the rail line was out of alignment, which meant that our streetcars couldn't come over the bridge. And so I believe they got one car over, which was a city car, and light and that, so the bridge could handle it. And we would be transported to the city side of the bridge as usual. Then we would walk the length of the bridge and get on the streetcar to ride the remainder of the way home. There were other times when they would be repairing the bridge and the sidewalk would be torn up, and where you usually walked, you could see the river below, and it was quite scary. When we were coming home from school, on days when we walked home, very often the bridge would be opened, and this was quite a performance because the bridge tender was alerted by the tugs on the river blowing their whistle 4 times, which we could also hear, so that when we heard the whistle, we knew the bridge would be open for the river traffic. And the children going to school were always very happy when we were delayed by the bridge being opened. And there was one momentous day when there were 9 tugs went through.
Oh, no.
It was a very, well, I guess there was more than one boom of logs, which required several tugs. And then there were other tugs involved, and so there were 9 whistles for the bridge. And at each succeeding boat whistle for the bridge tender, there was a loud cheer from the kids on the bus. And, you know, the more the merrier. The kids were very happy about that.
Well, you know, those kinds of experiences and reflections are the kinds of things that many other people living in the city, so to speak, have never experienced. And
there was one other incident I should tell you about,
Please do.
because it was a little bit close to home. When the swing span was opened, we were not supposed to proceed beyond the barrier, and that left quite a few feet between the barrier and the open span. So the bridge is open, and it is at it crosses directly opposed to the route of travel. And so some of the kids, the boys in particular, would want to see who could remain on the stationary portion of the bridge longest and be the last to jump off. And this was quite a scary procedure.
Oh, it would be. Almost legalized suicide.
Well, we're not supposed to be there at all. Well, this young fellow was too late, and he went in. And, of course, I wasn't there the day that this happened, but he lived on our street. And a number of years after this incident happened, I was doing a story on him, and so when I interviewed him, I asked him what it was like when he fell in the river. He said it was so cold.
Oh, boy.
And
swift, too.
Swift. And the chaps who were on the tug that was going through fished him out with pike poles.
Oh, boy.
He was lucky that
he wasn't
very
fortunate.
Injured seriously.
Oh, yes.
And that was the topic of conversation on the backyard fences for a long time.
I bet your mother and father said, "You keep away from that bridge."
Oh, well, yeah. You always got scolded for what happened to the other guy.
Well, that's very interesting, Edna. Perhaps we might turn to your later years now. After you finished school, Edna, I imagine it was time to look for a job. I have no idea, but I imagine if that were the case, did you find it difficult or relatively easy to find a job?
No, when I left school, it was difficult to find a job.
Yes.
There were more people in jobs So if you were one of the lucky ones, you were envied.
Mm-hmm. Well, did you spend much time after that? Did much time go by after that when you were married? Or that,
Yes, the intervening years were, I had jobs, and I also helped my mom. And as the years went on, her health was bad, so I took over to run the house for her and that. So I went out to work, in the late 30s, and I was working as a clerk in Spagnell's store, which was our local store here.
Oh yes, that's just down the street, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Down the avenue.
Mm-hmm.
I see.
And I was married in 1948, 22nd of May.
Uh-huh.
And
that's when you changed your name from Edna Moore to Mrs. Edna Anderson, right?
Yes,
Mm-hmm.
yes.
A great day.
Well, it wasn't an auspicious day as far as we didn't have a wedding and so on. Clarence had come home from overseas,
yes.
And neither one of us had very much money, so we couldn't afford a big wedding. And he had a large family, and I had a lot of friends, which meant that if we had a very small wedding, we would eliminate some of the people who would want to come, and they would be annoyed with us, and so we just snuck away and got married.
Oh.
And that didn't work very well either, because they were all annoyed with us for doing that.
You're danged if you do and danged if you don't.
More or less.
But
yes.
what a thrill to escape like that. I guess.
Well, it happened to be a weekend of the 24th of May, and at that time they hadn't changed the 24th to be celebrated on Monday, but this was a year when it was the 24th on a Monday. So we thought we would have 2 days together to have our honeymoon.
Mm-hmm.
And we came home from being married and found out that the river had been rising, and the freshet was very, very bad that year. And it was a very perilous time. Instead of settling down to our honeymoon, Clarence went to the dike to pack sandbags, to sandbag the dike. And so I stayed with my parents. We moved our stuff from our basement suite in my parents' home upstairs to my usual room, and so we were in a state of emergency for quite a while.
What a situation.
Yes, we were very fortunate in Queensboro that we weren't flooded and wiped off the map.
Yes, true enough.
So my wedding is auspicious for many reasons.
You mentioned to me that your mother died, I believe, in 1960, and your father in 1964. Did you move directly into this house after that?
No,
permanently, I should say.
We had our suite downstairs, and their health had deteriorated. And so it meant that we were with them constantly. And when my mother died, Dad asked us to come up and share the house with him.
I see.
Which we did, and we looked after Dad.
Yes.
And when he passed away, the house came to me. And then my husband and I shared the house.
And I assume now that Clarence has passed away, is that correct?
Oh, yes. Yes, he died 7 years ago.
7 years ago?
Yes, on December the 31st, 1991.
I see.
New Year's Eve.
But the years you had together were very interesting, I imagine.
Oh, yes, we had a very good life together.
Sure, I would imagine so.
Clarence got a job in the same store where we met each other, and he was the butcher for the local store. And he was well liked in the community, and people have said when they talk of him now, oh, he had such a nice smile, and he was so nice to talk with. And those are happy memories to have.
That's very good. That's very good.
And
So
Clarence,
he worked right here
yes,
in Queensland. Yeah.
yes.
He didn't have to travel across the bridge.
No, that was one thing we were very pleased about.
Yeah.
At that time, people didn't believe in working in the same community as their jobs were, and so they traveled long distances back and forth. And we just sat calmly by, and people used to say, well, we knew what time it was in the morning. We saw Clarence going down the road. They said they set their clocks by him.
Set their clocks by Clarence. Well, that's interesting. So what did the people do for recreation?
Oh, well, in our community where we had a large working class population, they were pretty busy all day.
Yes.
And fathers and mothers had large families sometimes, and at the end of the day, they weren't thinking too much about recreation. They were tired, and they would spend evenings, at home with the families.
But with the mixed ethnic population, I would imagine, I might be wrong, but I would imagine they would have special celebrations and so on with these.
Oh, yes.
I noticed there's a is it a Roman hall?
Roma hall.
I imagine they have many ethnic celebrations and functions that the community could be invited to.
But the Italian people were there were more of them in our community at one time, and because they wanted a place where they could get together, they, under Tony Sprice, formed their association, and they erected a hall, which was small in the beginning. There have been several versions of the hall, and because this hall was the first and only hall we had, it was a community gathering place. It was used for many weddings, and the Italian people, of course, were delighted. That was the goal of their life at that time, to have a place, and they were delighted when they accomplished their goal.
Yes.
And I believe it was 1929 when that hall opened.
Oh, is that right?
Yes.
So it has quite a history behind it.
Oh, yes. And the people who built it were wonderful people. They were community spirited. They also kept their own heritage alive. And we were friendly in the community. We all knew one another. And because of their ambition and what they accomplished, the rest of us could also enjoy the fruits of their efforts.
Good. And I imagine in many instances, well, let me put it this way. Today when we think of recreation, we think of organized recreation, And, but I would imagine here, as in other places, similar places, that much of their leisure time activity was family oriented.
That's true, yes. But here in our community, the children tended to make their own recreation.
Yes.
You might go by a vacant lot which had bush and trees on it, and there would be forts in the trees, and swings made from old tires, and great battles would be fought round about the bush and so on. During the winter, there was skating on the river. The river froze over when I was a girl. Of course, our ditches had a lot of water in them, and they froze, so the kids would skate to school on the ditch.
Is that fact?
Oh, yes.
That's interesting.
It was
the real canal all built into pieces there.
Yes. But of course, there were barriers, there were crossings, and there were supports for telephone wires, and they climbed over them and skated the rest of the way. In the summer, the kids would go down to the river to swim, and they'd build bonfires. But I wasn't allowed to go down there, fortunately, because it was dangerous down there.
I would imagine so.
And as time went on and the river became polluted, they blamed death. One of the boys died from, I can't think of the name of the disease now, but he contacted that from swimming in the river. And this was an indication to us long before people became conscious of pollution that the river was being polluted.
Yeah.
We saw other signs of that as well.
Sure.
And it was, my dad in particular was sort of keeping his eye on those kind of things. He knew that, our population was growing and our problems were growing.
Well, that sort of leads us into another area of thought, Edna. You might say Queensborough and its people. And you made reference to population, and you also made reference previously to the fact that when your folks first came here, the population wasn't that great. Has it risen remarkably since that time?
Very much so, yes.
All right. What would they, generally speaking, what might the population of the Queensborough neighborhood be now compared to what it was when your folks came here?
Well, today there's in the neighborhood of 2,700 people here.
Yeah.
At the time we came, there might have been about 200 or more people.
Mm-hmm. What would you say, Edna, are the various ways in which people in Queensborough supported themselves?
Because we had many immigrants here, they were very industrious people, but they realized that they had the potential here to really earn a good living. Their goal in life was to be able to give their children a good education. They thought this was a wonderful country and the opportunities would be great, and so they concentrated as much as they could on providing for their families by farming, fishing, boat building. There was many occupations. The farming consisted of fruit farming, truck farming, dairy farming. They had localized jobs such as shoemakers, merchants. You could name various things. We had a barber shop down here. So they were all operated by people within the community.
Did any people work downtown or did they travel to work?
Yes. I didn't mention the mills. We had local mills, and they employed a good portion of the population. They traveled from here to Fraser Mills, where they had work in Fraser Mills. And yes, there were people who lived here and worked elsewhere in various jobs.
So, to a certain extent, it was both a community in which they made their own livelihood and one which they used as a bedroom community.
That's right.
They lived here and worked someplace else. Well, that's very good. I would imagine, too, the fact that the soil is so fertile here, farming would be, vegetable farming and so on would be very good. And your flowers, you have a marvelous garden here, and I noticed the lush growth in other areas. It's because of the soil, isn't it? The Delta soil.
Yes. This was what attracted my father to coming here in the first place. He was from a farming family in Ontario, and he knew that this ground was very, very good for growing. And the unfortunate thing that has happened today with all the building that has taken place is the fact that it's all preloaded, and this wonderful fertile soil is covered and will never be reclaimed.
That's a shame.
Oh, it's heartbreaking.
Oh, sure.
My garden and a few others around still are the original gardens and the original soil. And this soil is black and loamy. Great.
I can remember we had friends who lived here, and we would have corn peas. They grew the most luscious corn.
Oh, yes.
And it was really and potatoes, oh, it's absolutely marvelous. They'd melt in your mouth. And flowers and so on. And I don't imagine there's not very much farming per se today. The occupational patterns today are quite different from what they were in the earlier days.
Well, there's so much of our land has been
Yes.
taken over by the builders now. There's very little left and very little in the way of gardening for commercial purposes.
Yeah. So most of the people apparently today, although they live here, they are working outside of the community.
I would say so.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
Just like any other community that goes through the pains of growth, I guess.
Well, one industry that we still have close at hand is the fishing industry.
Oh, yeah.
I understand that's in trouble now, too.
I'm interested also in the various characteristics of communities and how characteristics of communities change due to forces sometimes beyond their own control. And according to my research, the Fraser Mills New Westminster line commenced about 1912, and then the continuation of that on the first part of 1912 from New Westminster to Queensborough. It's also 1912. I think the exact date was September the 16th, 1912, according to the resource I had. And it terminated rather abruptly in 1937. Now that's 25 years of service, and that means that people became accustomed to a type of transportation, type of service. I remember the cars were the interurban type, and then it was replaced by buses. Did that change from the car lines to the bus line have any effect on the characteristics of Queensborough?
No, I don't think so.
I see.
The only thing that through my observation I would say that really changed was the fact that the electric railway and large streetcars that we rode in held many people. And as you traveled back and forth, you were sitting amongst your neighbors and friends. And you had more of a social side to your traveling, where you mixed with your friends and neighbors. And the conductor and also the motorman on the car would know who you were, and they would exchange information if someone was missing and so on.
That's interesting.
And that was one thing I missed very much when we changed to buses, because you were more restricted in the buses. They held fewer people, and it wasn't conducive to having a conversation. You couldn't get up and walk down the aisle the way you did in the old interurban.
No.
And that made a big change.
Sure.
I noticed that particularly.
Sure. And I would imagine it would be much more convenient too, would it? If you could travel from here, they had to work in Fraser Mills and directly to Fraser Mills.
Oh yes.
And
that was it was a wonderful service. We went right through the main street in New Westminster, Columbia Street. Yes. Well, I seldom got to the other end of the line, but it was a direct route right into town. And this is one of the things with the change in transportation, the change of route, that has also changed Columbia Street.
Yes, it contributed. Yes, of course. I can understand that, because I don't imagine that people here in Queensborough would be particularly interested in going to Columbia Street if the bus service to some other locality would be just as easy or convenient as going to New Westminster.
Well, people here, of course, our population was changing. The old timers were passing on. Some of them moved away. There were changes within the community. The highway came through, and that caused a great change. So I would say that it's an evolution, more or less, as well as a change in transportation that has changed the whole pattern, like in our city.
What is the bus route now? I've seen one or two buses on the street of the avenue up here, but do they come down Boundary Road to get into the city or into Queensborough?
Well, the general idea with their mode of transport now, since we've had SkyTrain, is to have all the buses running to a certain point on the SkyTrain line. Our particular place to connect with other buses is 22nd Street Station.
Oh, I
So
see.
our bus comes into our community. In fact, we have 2 buses. This is the poorest bus service, I think, that we've had yet.
So it's quite a sharp contrast to the old streetcars.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
I mean, we had wonderful transportation.
Yeah.
And as a little note on the side, I heard from one of the BC Electric employees, the BC Electric interurban line was completely paid for. There was no expenses whatsoever when they decided to change into buses. Yeah. And they never felt that same security again. Our bus transportation today is divided into 2 parts. A bus comes from 22nd Street and turns right, which would go into Richmond. The bus I take to come home leaves 22nd Street and at the highway turns left on to come in here and travel on Ewan Avenue. And this bus makes a circle around the industrial area of Annis's Island. And so I strongly suspect sometimes if we weren't connected to that industrial area that we might be without a bus. But
sure.
the
That's an interesting observation.
SkyTrain has changed the whole bus system in the Lower Mainland because everything was geared to go to SkyTrain, and you were traveling to SkyTrain to reach other destinations.
Well, is there anything else you'd like to say about how the transportation system is changing not only the characteristics, but some of the attitudes of
Oh, well, we feel hard done by many times because when the traffic is heavy and the buses are late, they are coming from other areas, and if they have had a hold-up that would miss a whole route, they just eliminate going to Queensborough and they go back and do the other route again. And that leaves our passengers stranded, especially at work time when they're coming and going to work. It's worst in the afternoon during the rush hour traffic. But one of my all-time complaints was that I don't think a person who makes up timetables for buses ever uses the bus.
No.
I think they just go by statistics and figure it out in their heads. It's not convenient.
No. So I guess the old bridge, Queensborough Bridge, is now, there is still a bridge there, but it goes down to Annis's Island, and there's a freight train running down to
It's for freight, yeah.
So the new bridge, new Queensborough Bridge, has that affected any patterns here? Do you see more traffic coming into the area?
Well, after the Alec Fraser Bridge was built, the Queensborough Bridge became an artery from the Alec Fraser.
I see.
And they put a highway through Queensborough to accommodate the Alec Fraser Bridge and link up with the Queensborough Bridge. So when they brought this highway through Queensborough, they just cut a swath through here and divided our community. A lot of people were forced to move. And we are now incorporated into that traffic. So in order to come into Queensborough, we are in that general flow of heavy traffic. And they have a 5-way system or something on the light at the crossing to come in here. And it's a real dynamite time when it's rush hour.
It just changed the complexion of the community
altogether.
Yeah, that's amazing. And it's amazing, too, how many people, I guess, didn't forecast this or they only recognize it now as a problem, you know.
Oh, I think there
were.
were.
Not the people here, but
that's right. The people here were thinking.
Of course they did, but the ones outside were planning all this. Right?
Well, they weren't thinking of us. We were thinking of us because we were here.
That's right.
But we were just something that happened on the road of building whatever they were doing.
I understand the new bridge was built around 1960, wasn't it?
That's right, yeah.
So since 1960, and then the advent of the other bridge, things have really changed a great deal.
Yes.
Yes, yeah.
1986 was the
Yeah.
changing year. That
Yeah.
was the year of Expo.
Yeah.
And my husband went to town. He was retired at that time. And he went to town in the morning by the old route.
Oh, yeah.
And when he came home in the afternoon, he came home by the new road.
Yeah.
Nobody knew anything about it. They just did all these things, and you found out, well, this isn't the way you go home anymore.
Well, probably another thing, too, that changed perhaps to a certain extent, and I mentioned the Queensboro Bridge, I kind of got ahead of myself, but I'm thinking also of the war years and the post-war years, like every community underwent some adjustment.
Yes, well, there was not as big an adjustment for the war years.
No.
We had the same problems as other places.
Right.
Our young men went off to war.
Yeah.
The able-bodied men were working.
Yeah.
And it left many jobs without someone to work, and so the women stepped in.
Yeah.
And that even happened with our farms, the Chinese farmers, and they had to rely on the women of the community, who were very good about going working in the farms. And yes, the war years made some changes, but not specifically to our area any more than anywhere else.
No. But you did make reference a few moments ago about the flood.
Yes.
I noticed that all the houses here have basements, but not subterranean basements. That was probably because of the fact that they were guarding themselves against potential flooding. Is that correct?
Well, in the early days, the dikes were poor here.
Yeah.
They were built by people themselves in the area who owned land, and we are 2 feet below sea level. So they had to construct these dikes to protect themselves, and they just took the material at hand, which was the earth and the clay and whatever was at hand, and they built the dikes up from that.
Yes.
On the top of the dike, there was only a footpath. And during the flood, of course, any material that was brought in for sandbagging and so on could only be taken to the side of the dike and deposited at various intervals. And these sandbags and so on had to be carried along the top of the dike and placed on the dike. After the flood, the Harbor Commission and the government got busy and built a road all the way around so that we could have cars traverse this area. Our houses, through necessity, were built above ground, and they could be a few feet off the ground with a few steps up, or they could be one level above ground, where you've had a basement beneath. As a matter of fact, there was only one house in the Queensboro area that had a dugout basement. Yes, and they had steam heat in that house. And I found that out many years after my childhood. And I found it very intriguing to think that someone could at least dig out a basement, because usually here when you put a spade in the ground and took out a shovel full of earth, the ground filled with water, your hole filled with water. And that's the reason that we had no dugout basements.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Interesting. Well, it really is an interesting place, there's no doubt about it.
No, it's unique.
And it's changing in many other ways too, I think, because, you know, we had that experience with the Port Royal housing development. Had to go down there and act a bit on the streets. You probably heard the Irving House.
Yes.
It's an interesting situation. But I thought to myself, gosh, this is a sharp contrast with how it was when the early settlers came here, and then later on too, when they were trying to make a living. And now there's all this. And I imagine, I think I've noticed other developments in this area. That's probably, you're bringing in people entirely different to the people who came here originally.
Oh, yes. When you speak of the Port Royal development, part of that development was built on land where there was a sawmill or a mill.
Oh, yes.
And
the shipyards, too. You're right next door to it. Yeah.
But on the one side, the opposite side to the part with the shipyards, they had polluted ground because of the materials from the mill. And so that all had to be taken away.
Oh boy.
And they couldn't find anybody willing to take it. And it went up to the interior someplace, I believe. So they've had a lot of work down in that area to make it, suitable for a residential area.
Well, that's interesting. So you've lived here most of your life, haven't you?
Yes.
All of your life, I might say.
Practically.
Practically. And so you're one who's seen so many changes that
Yes.
it's hard, probably sometimes difficult to interpret this the way you'd really want to people who are not aware of these changes.
Oh,
yeah.
You can't explain to people really how it was so that they'd understand it. It's a case of you have to experience the situation before you really understand.
Sure, I know. Well, there are other factors too, of course, that are happening that are helping to meet change, and I've heard you give nothing but praise to your local community center. When was that established? Can you recall?
It was opened in 1978. We just celebrated our 20th anniversary.
20th?
Yes. Well, that was something that we needed in our community from day one, I would say. Of course, in the very early days, there wasn't a population here to utilize something like that. But when I was young, if our young people had had a place like that, it would have made a tremendous difference in their lives.
Sure. It would help to knit the community together too. See how people.
Yes.
What is the range of their programming down there?
Oh, they have such a lot going on. It goes from tots, mums and tots, young people. There's something for everyone there, right up to the seniors.
All ages and both sexes.
Exactly.
I noticed as I drove away from our interview last time, or our not the taping interview, but the introductory interview, last day I was here, but there's a sign on your board that said, made reference to the Urban Farmers Fall Fair. Is that now? I thought to myself, there aren't any farmers here now, but that's sort of a name that they give to the fair because they have people coming with their homegrown vegetables. And that
well, yes, the people here are still growing their own homegrown things.
So they're urban farmers, so to speak.
That's right.
Yeah, that's good. That's good.
We had a group of young people who got together and gave it this name. And
is that right?
Yes.
Good.
We have a lot of young people coming into the area who have not been confirmed Queensboroites. They've come here and they're raising families here, and they're community-spirited people, wonderful young people, and our older people were so glad to see them come with that attitude. And these young people brought wonderful ideas with them, and like the urban farmers, that was their idea, and so much has been done
sort
by
of a
the
creative
young
suggestion, something original.
Yes. We're creative in Queensboro. There's no doubt.
What is the director's name?
Oh, at the moment it's Renee Chadwick.
Can I write that down so I get the excuse me? I'll just put the Renee. How does she spell her first name?
R-E-N-E and
R-E-N-E.
Yeah.
R-E-N-E.
Yeah. Chadwick.
Chadwick. Is she from?
No.
She's from
out of town. Yeah. From another community.
Another community center or another?
Oh no. Well, she works for the city of New Westminster.
Yeah.
I don't know where she came from before she came here.
Well, Riley Park. That's
Ryle.
Oh, Ryle Park. Excuse me. R-Y-A-L-L. Ryle Park.
Right.
Excuse me. Was that established before the center or after the center?
Oh, we had the park before the center.
Yeah.
We had a park given to us by the city when the Queensboro School, the second school, was still there. Our young people wanted baseball diamonds and they wanted football fields, and there was nothing here like that.
No.
And there were two gentlemen in the community who started sports with the kids here.
Oh, good.
What was his name? Anderson, Chick Anderson.
Oh, yeah.
And there
No
was,
relation?
no.
I see.
Another person here, Louis Zazara. And one of our baseball diamonds is named after Louis.
Oh.
Yeah. They were great sports fans and sports people themselves, and they worked with the young people. And if you talk to some of the young people who are now grown men and women, they have nothing but praise for those men and the time they gave to the kids.
Sure. Good role models, too.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's very important. The role modeling is just as important as the activity itself.
Well, I think it's more important because
Good for you. Yeah.
it's the enthusiasm they generate that makes it so important.
Right, right.
But we were finally given a park next to the school ground, and the city then sold that property to CPA for wartime purposes. There was a large building down there.
What is this?
Canadian Pacific Airlines.
Oh, hey, okay. Canadian Pacific Airlines, right.
They repaired planes and that down here, and they had access to the river as well. And I don't remember, I suppose after the war that was closed, but when they sold the property to the CPA, they then bought property down here, which was right beside Howe Street, and they built a park there. And the park was a block long. It went from Ewan right back to Boyd Street. So the park was developed in stages, and in the beginning they had a children's wading pool, and that was very popular with the little children here. And they in time built picnic shelters and ball fields, and the Kiwanis built a picnic shelter and put in a stove for them, and it was quite a large development and a focal point in Queensborough at that time. But when the highway went through, it went right through the middle of the property. So the city had to get other land, and we now have the playing fields and that down by the dike, and it comes up to the community center grounds now, so it's all one complex. And they had a children's playground built, and they call it Ryle Park still, at the back of the property for the community center. And within the last couple of years, one of our neighbors spearheaded a move to have a tiny tot playground built. And this
Very good.
This is beautiful.
Sure.
And we had a tragedy in the community. One of the little girls was run over and killed, and her name was Megan Gunderson.
Oh,
And
I read about that. That was by the hotel, wasn't it?
no, that was another tragedy.
That was another tragedy.
That was another tragedy. But this wee one, her parents and their parents, and it went back to great-grandparents, I believe, were residents of this area. And they've named this tiny tot playground as Megan's Place in honor of Megan.
That's M-E-G-A-N?
M-E-A-G-E-N.
M-E-A-G-E-N? And what is her last name?
Gunderson.
G-U-N?
D-E-R.
D-E-R-S-O-N. Writing this down because I have to make a report on this, an overview, you see. Not a report, but a summary, and I want to make sure I get the spelling. Well, that's fine. Gosh, that's a horrible thing, though, that they sometimes have to pay the price for this, you know.
They've never found the one who caused the accident.
Gosh.
And and their family has been very supportive in our community. They're wonderful people.
Does Ryle, R-Y-A-L-L, Ryle Park contain picnic benches and lily ponds and
not
ponds?
lily ponds and duck ponds, but we have nice beds of flowers around. benches to sit on, and there's parking area close by.
Do you ever take your friends over there?
Well, we have, yes.
Yeah,
I haven't recently.
No.
But,
in other words, it could be used by a variety of ages, in other words.
oh, yes, yes.
It isn't just ball diamonds. No.
Photographers from the local paper have come through here, and they see East Indian men sitting, the older generation, with the babies, minding the grandchildren. Yeah. And we've seen pictures of them, and the park is used by everyone, and as our community center is.
Well, I'd just like to refer now, if I may, to some other resources. I'll just go down one at a time and ask you if they exist, and if they don't exist, if you think they should exist, or if really there's no need for them, whatever your opinion might be.
You want my reaction, in other words?
Well, either positive or negative.
Right, okay.
So, and I did that too. Didn't put these down on this piece of paper I have in front of me because I favor these. It's just that I'm just curious about them. For example, a shopping mall. Is there a shopping mall available in?
No, but we have a supermarket.
You have a supermarket.
Yeah.
And it covers. Is that the one down here on Ewing Avenue? And does that meet your satisfaction?
Yes, it's a handy store, corner store. It's available in the evenings and Sundays and all. Yeah.
On Sundays too. Sure, a variety of things. But you have to do most of your shopping across the river. When I say across the river, I mean the other part of Westminster.
Well, not necessarily.
Not necessarily.
The SkyTrain makes it very easy to go to Metrotown.
Oh, yes, of course.
And by the time you change...
That's another thing that blanks on Columbia Street.
Oh, definitely, yes.
I remember Columbia Street was the only place you could buy something.
But you see, the transportation has made it difficult to get to Columbia Street.
Yes.
For me to go to Columbia Street now, I take a bus to 22nd Street, and then I take another bus or SkyTrain, depending on which route I want, to take me over to the center of Uptown, and then I have to take another bus to get downtown. So you see, it's so difficult to get to Columbia Street, you can't be bothered about it,
Why do I want to go there?
Yes, but I find it quite handy if I take SkyTrain, I can get to Columbia Street.
Yeah, let me